Hello everyone, and thank you for joining to the 5th Technology Transfer webinar. Today's topic is on new models for licensing university innovation. As always, before we kick off with today's presentation, I would like to give the floor to Luca Escoffier, a project manager of the U-Japan Technology Transfer Helpdesk. Over to you, Luca.
Yeah, hi, Hiva. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to everyone in Europe. Good night to all the people that are crazy enough to be online in Japan. I am. Good evening from here in Tokyo. It's midnight, and we also have our guest speaker today from Portland. So it's 8 a.m. On the West Coast in the U.S. Just a couple of housekeeping procedures. I would like to, before introducing our guest, just talk a little bit about the help desk. I'm really happy that there are so many people online following the webinars. This is the 5th webinar that we are organizing from February 2016. Here on this slide, there are some clickable links. So if you want to shoot me an email to have more information about the help desk, please do so. I would be more than happy to hearing from you. You also have the link to the website, so you can take a look at the database that we are building up. If you're working for universities, please do contact me, because we have a lot of opportunities for posting your technologies for free. And if you're an SME, please click on the third link that you see on the slide, and I would really appreciate if you can take the 3-minute survey. It really helps us a lot in shaping a little bit better the service. And finally, please do take a minute to register to the newsletter. So the last link that you see on the slide, please just click on that, and it will guide you through will take you to the page of the help desk where you can register to the newsletter, and then I will be able to send you all the news reports and all the other new things that are coming up. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest for today, Mr. Arundeep Pradhan. Just a couple of words to introduce Arundeep, that also was previously a speaker for a short series of podcasts that are already on the website of the help desk. Arundeep is a pioneer in the field of technology transfer, and he began his career at the University of Utah and subsequently spent 5 years at Colorado State University. He's the former Associate Vice President of Technology Transfer and Business Development at Oregon Health and Science University, where he also managed industry collaborations, business development, entrepreneurship, technology licensing, and IP. In addition, he was also the president of the Association of University Technology Managers in 2009 and the interim CEO of a startup biotech company. Arundeep is currently the president of Appio, a consulting firm that he co-founded in 2012 in Portland, US. So without further ado, welcome Arundeep. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Luca, for the opportunity, and good evening and good midnight to everybody who's here. Thanks for the opportunity. So, as Luca mentioned, I'm going to talk about new models for licensing university innovations. And one of the things that I have discovered over time is that all of the activities under the umbrella of technology transfer, whether it's entrepreneurship or industry collaborations or the actual licensing itself, are all driven to the ultimate goal of licensing university innovations to industry. So my talk is going to focus on 3 aspects of the activities that are covered under the technology transfer umbrella these days, which is licensing, university industry collaborations, and entrepreneurship, all of which lead to licensing at some point, and then a brief case study on one of the innovative models that is currently being used. So starting with licensing, I did a quick survey of the various activities that are being undertaken by universities to encourage licensing their innovations to companies. So the first one that I came across was co-marketing. So agreement between Purdue University and Hanyang University in South Korea to co-market each other's innovations so that they increase the outreach and the scope of geographical coverage that they achieve in order to have access to a larger selection of companies that can see their technologies. It's interesting to me from a different perspective because when I was running technology transfer offices, we were approached by several universities to partner. And one of the dilemmas that we always faced was that we would have to dedicate resources from our office to somebody else's technologies in order to make that effective for them. And this model is relatively new. Some of the universities in the US do engage in partnering with other smaller universities, but I haven't seen an international collaboration like this before. So this was very interesting to see. We'd have to follow it to see how effective it is going to be. Royalty-free licensing is something that has been discussed several times in technology transfer circles, and I think University of Minnesota is the first one to promote this. And the interesting thing about this model to me is that there is no expectation of royalties. However, the university does expect the company to perform under due diligence criteria to make sure that the technology is commercialized. And this is the royalty-free licensing is somewhat related to the next item, which is instant access or easy access licensing. Easy access licensing was first started at the University of Glasgow by Kevin Cullen, who was running their office. The idea being that the terms of the license are predetermined and they are very low risk financially to the company in order to acquire the patent rights. This was also promoted by University of North Carolina very early on, and most recently most of the South African universities have adopted a similar model, and I think over 25 universities across the world are engaging in this. The focus of royalty-free licensing and instant access licensing is to really create a very low barrier to entry. When we're at universities, we file for patent protection on very early stage innovations. And not all of those innovations get licensed immediately. However, they are still valuable. And the question then becomes, what is the best way in order to make those innovations available for commercialization? And many universities are now starting to use this approach. Technology portals are very popular. I am skeptical with most technology transfer or technology portals because all of the ones that I've come across provide a listing of technology. The Association of University Technology Managers has a technology portal. There are others that are much larger, like Hong Kong IP Exchange. The limitation, in my opinion, with respect to these technology portals is that they provide a very brief description of the technology, which is hard to understand where that might fit within a company. And companies typically don't search technology portals for licensing opportunities. They primarily focus on the research publications to determine which faculty member is doing what type of research, and look for opportunities from that perspective. And we'll talk a little bit more about technology portals later, because that's the case study that we're going to cover. The other thing that universities have done is create gap funds, technology gap funds. And we created, when I was at the University of Utah, we created a technology gap fund in the late 80s, early 90s. The purpose of the Technology Gap Fund at most universities is to advance the development of the technology internally at the university to a point where the technology appeals to industry. And so universities typically deploy between $10,000 and $50,000 to advance these technologies. The technologies are typically selected by a external panel of industry experts, investors, patent attorneys, who will rank projects, and then the projects are funded. Some universities use external consulting companies to provide this review to rank projects, and the idea being that the external review and ranking of projects provides for a more objective selection of projects that may be more ready for commercialization, as opposed to internally selected projects by faculty or by the Technology Transfer Office. There are over 150 universities in the US that provide these kinds of funding opportunities, and in quickly looking across the literature in the field, there are many universities in Europe that provide these opportunities, but not as many in Asia yet. So this is something that is still being considered and should be considered, because this is one of the most effective ways to advance technologies internally. Technology transfer hubs are an interesting concept because they represent a centralization of services. France did its first centralization many years ago by creating, I think, 5 or 6 regional technology transfer hubs, which provide services to many universities, both large and small. There are pros and cons to this approach. The pros are that services are centralized, and so you're more effectively communicating to industry, and universities that are small and don't have the resources to have their own technology transfer offices can now engage in technology transfer to the centralized hubs. The disadvantage of this model is that it puts the technology transfer office remote from many university campuses, and so your day-to-day direct contact with researchers and faculty members is limited. That's also solvable by having representatives on each campus or making sure you visit each campus. But those are just some of the things that you would need to take into account if taking a look at a model like this. So, briefly in going through all of those models, there are several things that sort of jump out in terms of creating a new model for licensing. It's very clear that there are several components that need to be in place if you are going to make technology licensing easy. I think the first one, and we still don't do this yet to a large extent because we are more supply driven than market driven, is identifying the market need for the technology that you're trying to patent and license. Typically, technology transfer has been a supply-driven effort. Our university engages in research, our faculty and researchers create inventions. Those inventions are then disclosed to the Technology Transfer Office, who then go out to determine whether those technologies and innovations have market applications or market potential or commercialization capabilities. A decision is then made to file for intellectual property protection, and then effort is made to go and try to find a company to license the technologies to. There is a slight shift in this approach, and I think the approach is now looking at trying to work more directly with industry to see what problems need to be addressed, and then trying to find resources to collaborate with industry, or looking within the university to see if there are resources that address those problems and needs, and then working backwards to see if there is some innovation there or intellectual property there that may be commercialized. We still need to make sure that we appropriately obtain protection and do the licenses, but in my opinion, we need to start focusing more on market need as opposed to supply. The other thing that was jumping out through all of these models that universities are now using is that the transaction actually needs to be made very simple. So the license agreement negotiation process can be quite cumbersome at times, and it varies from sector to sector, industry sector to industry sector. It varies from region to region. It varies because of local, state, provincial, country laws. But ultimately, there is an issue that is associated with a transaction cost. And that goes to de-risking that transaction. So one of the ways to de-risk that transaction is to take a look and see what terms of the license are actually important, and try to either pare down or eliminate those terms that are not important. license agreements can get very complicated, and the more complicated they are, the longer they take to negotiate. And that's really the thought behind the instant access or the easy access or the royalty-free license model, which is the financial terms are predetermined. And so there's usually not a lot of money that exchanges hands. There's not a lot of equity that exchanges hands. The royalty rates are relatively small, making it less risky for the company to enter into that transaction. The company then usually has a period of time where they are supposed to diligently develop the product, and then there's a royalty, relatively low royalty that is received on net sales. The the thought behind that is that as universities, the major objective of technology transfer offices should be and is to make sure that their technologies are made available to the public via commercial channels. And if the transaction is difficult, then that is a big stumbling block for industry. This also goes hand in hand in increasing the access and the availability of those technologies. Now, technology portals sort of make it relatively easy to search. The other accessibility issue has to do with the openness of a university with respect to how visible their faculty are to industry and how easily they can be accessed. So all of those go hand in hand and are related to each other. And the last item, which is de-risking the technology, is directly related to the increasing creation of gap funds at universities in response to industry, because in a lot of sectors, industry has become less or has become more risk averse. So industry is wanting to see technologies that are closer to the product that they're going to be launching or how it may fit in within a product pipeline, as opposed to investing a lot of money into research and development to get to a product. Of course, there needs to be a balance in all of these factors, because the more you de-risk a technology, the more valuable it is, and the more money that the university would typically want for something like that. So these are not, they all sort of fit together, and then you have to decide what aspects of these models is going to work for your particular institution. So moving on to university industry collaborations, and one of the reasons why I think this is important to discuss is a lot of these university industry collaborations lead to licensing university innovations to that particular industry or the company that you are collaborating with. For example, in the first case here, Celgene, Johns Hopkins, University of Pennsylvania, Columbia, and Mount Sinai have gotten together to focus on cancer and inflammatory disease. It's a 10-year project, and Celgene is paying $12.5 million to each institution for the right to option any innovations that come out of those activities. The way that the process works in this particular project is that projects will be proposed by university faculty members at each of the institutions, and then will be assessed by a panel and then funded. And then if there is an innovation, Celgene obtains the right to license that technology and further investigate the development of that technology into a product. So one of the quotes from the leadership at one of the institutions was that the coordinated engagement, creative thinking, unique perspective, and expertise of the institutions, plus the resources and the development capability of the company, was really one of the driving forces in sort of putting this consortium together for research and cooperative development. I think we will actually see more and more models like this. I've seen models like this on a smaller scale and in other industry. One of the a more typical consortium model that I was working with many years ago involved 25 companies in the oil and gas, natural gas sector, which were working with 5 institutions to do something similar as this. I also ran across an interesting model by 3 universities in the UK, University of Derby, Trent University, University of Nottingham, where $29 million was allocated to a program to enable innovations for specifically reaching out to local small and medium enterprises and helping them address problems that they were facing using university resources. The $29 million came from each of the institutions contributed to that, and then some money was also provided by the European Research and Development Fund. From a university perspective, this is relatively unique because a lot of institutions are looking to receive money from industry as opposed to use money internally to work with industry. So I think this is something that is worth noting, that with respect to not only just innovation, but research and development, knowledge exchange, there are going to be opportunities for the companies to not only address their problems, but also hire students and engage at a level with the university that they didn't engage at before. So GlaxoSmithKline and Avalon Ventures have created something called the Discovery Partnerships with Academia. And it's an interesting model, and the intent of the model is to accelerate the development of university research. It's a co-investment, so the company and Avalon Ventures co-invest into the particular startup company. Avalon sources the technologies from the university and then manages the startup company. Because of the process that's in place, the startup companies are created relatively quickly with management in place, investment in place, and milestones that need to be achieved in the development of the technology. If those milestones are not achieved, then those startup companies are shut down relatively quickly as well, because you don't want to expend resources for developing a particular technology if you don't think it's going to work. If everything works out, then the startup company is acquired by GSK, and so the interesting thing here is that the university innovation is licensed first to a startup company, which is managed by Avalon Ventures, which is funded by GlaxoSmithKline. There are license agreements in place with the university. And then if it is successful, it is acquired by GSK for an acquisition fee. So there's licensing, there's collaboration, there's startup creation, and then there's an exit. So it sort of addresses all aspects of developing university innovation through a startup platform. There are several other university industry collaboration models. For example, the University of Kansas is working with a company called Bionovus, where Bionovus is going to focus on therapeutic, diagnostic, and medical devices, when it becomes essentially the development arm of the university. So they would be taking technologies that are selected in those categories all the way through clinical trials, with the research being done at the University of Kansas. University of Pennsylvania and Dimensions Therapeutics is a similar approach, where Dimension Therapeutics is responsible for the clinical development of those technologies, and the University of Pennsylvania is responsible for the preclinical research on those innovations. The Y-Star Institute Innovio collaboration is more traditional. It is focused on a particular sector, with Innovio having the right to obtain licenses to those technologies. So when you look at university industry collaborations, several things jump out in terms of what makes it important and what the outcomes of those collaborations is going to be. Starting with the recognition of different types of expertise. So universities are excellent at basic research, fundamental research. They don't do development. The development expertise resides in the company, and the cultures are very different. So there is, in universities, a need to get projects funded and research funded. There is a need at companies to access basic research. And with the recent developments in the biotech sector, those capabilities are increasingly not available. In other sectors, they are also less available in industry, just because of industry cost-cutting models. And so there is a desire to collaborate with universities where basic research is occurring, and there is a mutual benefit that comes out of those collaborations. The primary goal of any collaboration is to accelerate the development of those innovations into a point where a decision is made whether that addresses that potential innovation is able to address a particular problem, or whether the project should be abandoned. At most universities, the Technology Transfer Office has to engage with sponsored programs to enable this to happen. And the communication between those two entities in the university becomes extremely important. Some universities have moved and are moving to a more consolidated model where all industry-related activity is covered under technology transfer and business development or commercialization offices, so that transaction becomes more seamless. And as discussed earlier, the ease of transaction becomes very critical as well. Entrepreneurship is something where there is an increasing focus worldwide. Every university that I have worked with recently, and every country that I have visited recently, there is an increased focus on entrepreneurship and how to encourage startup companies, how to support startup companies, how to manage startup companies. So I'm going to go over some programs that I thought were really interesting. We could actually spend the entire day just talking about different models that universities are using. So I've just selected a few. Virginia Commonwealth University has decided that it is going to focus on student entrepreneurship. Like many other universities, this is an increased focus in the US and outside the US to encourage students to be more entrepreneurial. So VCU has created a pre-accelerator program that accepts 16 student teams. The student teams are paid, and they go through a 3-month intensive mentoring. They go through extensive projects with respect to technologies that they may have selected from university research, or they may be their own ideas. But the intent is to provide these student teams with the expertise to be successful entrepreneurs and advance their technologies to product. Another program that was created at Oregon Health and Science University many years ago was the Springboard program. The focus of the program being that to provide the faculty entrepreneurs with resources to acquire the knowledge and the skills to be successful entrepreneurs. So attending entrepreneurship boot camps or startup boot camps, going to conferences, hiring consultants to help with business development plans, product development plans, providing and matching management resources to for the potential startup company. Also being able to use the money to hire attorneys to help with establishing the startup company, which is, all of these are very important, because in my career, having worked with about 150 or so startup companies over the last 30 years, one of the things I had experienced was that the corporate structure of the startup company didn't really match how the startup company was going to be successfully commercializing the product. And so you have to go back and unravel and recreate the startup company, which can be very expensive. So over 5 years, this program provided about $120,000 in funds to about 15 companies, resulting in $29 million of grant funding and equity investment. And the grant funding that I'm talking about here is through a US program called SBIR and STTR, which is specifically targeted to product development in startup companies. So these are not basic research funds. These are funds allocated for product development. It's a form of non-dilutive investment into the company from the US federal government. The University of Arizona has a similar program now to the Springboard program that I talked about through Tech Launch Arizona. They provide pre-license assistance to the faculty members, so a lot of education, startup boot camps. They match them with funding opportunities. The SBIR and STTR program in the US is very popular. They provide mentoring by matching them with other entrepreneurs, and they also provide access to local angel investment networks. Just as a short note for those of you who are not aware of the US SBIR and STTR program, SBIR stands for Small Business Innovative Research, and STTR stands for Small Business Technology Transfer Research. These are programs that are required by law, and they are part of all of the funding agencies that provide extramural funds for research from the federal government. So for example, the National Institutes of Health, or the Department of Energy, or the Department of Defense, or the National Science Foundation, which are all funding agencies in the US, have to allocate 3.5% of their extramural research funding for these programs. So if the funding is 30 million, then approximately 30 million, then the 30 billion, then $9 billion is allocated to this program, or $10 billion is allocated to the program. So getting back, Cornell University has an interesting program to target postdoctoral fellows, where there is time, resources, and effort that is allocated to a particular project, and if selected, the project is provided with $150,000 of funding for 5% equity, which is usually enough to get a startup company on its feet in the US and have funding for 6, 9, 12 months, so that additional money, either through the SBIR or STTR program, can be raised, or through traditional investment vehicles via venture capital or angel investors. Purdue has actually taken an interesting approach, somewhat similar to this. They have partnered with a consulting company, so an external entity, to funnel leadership and management to the startup companies. all are sort of similar programs recognizing that startup companies need help and support and resources in several different key areas in order to be successful. The University of Delaware program is more of a spin-in program where student teams work with local businesses to first address innovation problems that the local businesses might be facing, and also learn about innovation management, and then work with local businesses and mentors to start companies. This is relatively new. It seemed interesting because it's more outward focused than inward. We'll have to just track it and see how successful it may be over time. The University of Illinois has started something which is relatively novel in the US, which is a bachelor's degree in entrepreneurship. It's a dual degree targeting engineering, computer science, and physics students, with other disciplines possibly being added over time. They accept 25 to 30 students per year into this program, and really focus on providing the skills and education required to be quote unquote good managers of innovation. Based on a very quick look, there are several hundred universities in Europe that offer something similar. So European universities were well ahead of the curve compared to the US. Iowa State University has set up a technology accelerator focused on agricultural technologies. And the accelerator is managed by a small group of investors who select the technologies that would go into the accelerator. They focus on innovations from faculty and students. The idea being that a particular industry focus for an accelerator is beneficial because there are like-minded companies that would, or projects that would be in the accelerator, and then be able to have synergy via discussion. There are many accelerators across the US and Europe, and each accelerator has a somewhat different model, but the bottom line intent of all of the accelerators is to advance the development of innovations to product via startup companies. So when looking at sort of all of these models that are available, it was very clear that so I was talking about the increased focus of entrepreneurship, and this is there are several reasons for this. Economic development being one, the desire of faculty and students to be more entrepreneurial being another, and the desire, of course, especially in the U.S. And as in other places, is to create more jobs. It becomes very important to engage in entrepreneurship, but you have to keep in mind the ecosystem, the innovation ecosystem that relates to startup companies in your particular area, which means, do you have the infrastructure? Are the entrepreneurs able to get mentored? Do they have access to management for their startup companies? Do they have access to capital for their startup companies? Not everywhere is Stanford or MIT or other places where all of these uh, things have had a chance to develop and grow over the last 100 years. And so many universities have recognized that they need to step in and provide these resources to these startup companies through various kinds of programs. One of the things that I was engaged in was building infrastructure around the last university where I worked, which was Oregon Health and Science University, to provide this ecosystem, to create this ecosystem for the startup companies. We actually created, with the help of city government and state government, wet lab accelerators. We created technology gap funds as well as seed investment funds. We had existing entrepreneurs provide mentoring. We provided access to management matching, and also to angel networks and introductions to venture capital, really trying to support startup companies through their entire cycle of their life. So looking at creating an innovation model or a new model for entrepreneurship in your particular location, you have to see what is available and then take advantage of that and fill in the gaps. And there are definitely aspects of similarity which can be used in terms of the best practices that you would want to adopt. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the technology portal, the case study here. So just a little bit of a background on the technology portal concept. There have been many technology portals that I have had the opportunity to work with, starting with one that was created in the US many, many years ago and was called iBridge. The intent of iBridge and even the new technology portals like the Autumn Technology Portal is to have universities submit their technologies, which are then listed and are searchable in a database, so that if a company is looking for a technology, they can go to these technology portals and do a search. Most of these technology portals end up having between 15 to 25,000 technologies that are searchable, which is a lot. In my opinion, if you're submitting a few technologies, they have the ability to just be lost in the other sea of technologies that are available. So you can tell that I'm not a huge proponent of technology portals in the general sense. To me, a technology portal needs to provide much more than a passive listing of technology. And the Oregon Health and Science University Technology Portal is actually something like that. And I was responsible for creating this and then having it managed through my office. So the Oregon Health and Science Technology Portal was primarily created. The initial reason for creating the technology portal was to reduce the workload. This was created about 10 years ago, and what was happening was that we would put technologies into our database, and then we would have to put technologies onto our website. And what I wanted to have happen is to have the technologies described in the database and then automatically go into our website so that there was one point of management for these. In the evolution of this, what we also decided is that we did not want to be a static technology portal. So we wanted the technology portal to be able to engage in transactions. So what that meant is that we had to create the right kind of agreements, select the right kind of technologies. So the purpose of the technology portal actually came to be a way for us to, quote unquote, sell university technology, much like you would go to Amazon. So the type of technologies we selected were biological materials, software that was downloadable, print, or other resources that were training, which you could really download and just buy. So we also have other technologies which are just available for licensing, but there are a number of technologies that were then provided on this portal, which were biological materials that were used by research by other faculty members at other institutions who would then go to our technology portal and be able to order. We had to establish a pricing model where we worked with faculty members to come up with the right price of biological materials or the software or the print media or video or anything else. We had to create the administrative rules. So the first year that we launched this, our income from this was just $10,000. But over 7 or 8 years of having this and then promoting it, the income from this was reaching at the level of $200,000 to $250,000. So it's a tool that can be used, and it can be used effectively based on the types of technologies that you have and the nature of those technologies that you want to put up into this portal should lend themselves very easily for transaction, as should the agreements. So I'm going to stop here. We've talked about institutional support, institutional drivers, the innovation ecosystem, the faculty-student drivers to engage in all of these different kinds of novel programs. And I see that we are close to time, and I'm going to end here to just sort of leave some time open for questions and answers.
Thank you, Deep, for the very interesting presentation with a lot of insights, and I myself have a lot of questions. But as you said, I will leave the floor now to the participants. So if you have any questions, please do type them directly onto the chat window so that we can see them. And yep, I will leave then the opportunity to Deep to directly choose questions from So I would leave maybe a minute or two to the participants to write the questions. But it seems that they're kind of shy. So as I said, I have probably the first question for you, and so you have an experience of several decades in this field. What, since most of the participants are probably from Europe, what is your recommendation, your advice for you to professionals that are coming from a world that, I mean, in this field, everybody knows that there is a big gap between the performance of US universities and European universities and research centers in terms of monetization of IP. So, in your opinion, is there really a true difference between the two systems, beside the pure figures? And if there is a difference, how can we can bridge this gap, if possible?
Yeah, I think the main difference is mainly the numbers, and the numbers are and the numbers only reflect the longer time that U.S. universities have been engaged in this activity. Um, I think European universities, my exposure to universities is that they are more entrepreneurial, more flexible than a lot of the U.S. institutions. That there is more innovation going on in the field of technology transfer. Broadly speaking, I mean, in the US, we still deal with technology transfer as the term, but in Europe, the term for a longer time has been knowledge transfer. So that covers a larger scope of that. So I think with respect to the differences, it's primarily time and perhaps the number of experienced professionals that are available in the U.S. versus Europe. But otherwise, I think it's just again, maybe even 5-10 years, the numbers in Europe are going to be matching those in the U.S. or maybe even exceeding those.
Thank you, Ramdeep. Well, and for those that are interested, actually, we kind of dealt with this topic a little bit more in detail also during the podcast that we recorded. So for you that are interested especially in these subtopic, let's say within the topic of monetization, please do take a look at the podcast. And I can see in the meantime that there are some questions in the chat window. So I don't know if you want to take a look.
Yeah, so the first question is, where is value in educational content? MOOCs have given the public an impression that best education can also be free. Will content abundance mean people will not pay for it? I don't think that that's the case. I've been working lately with some smaller institutions who are not more technology focused, they're more innovation focused. And I have seen many innovations coming out of sectors, education, psychology, music, where I think people will be willing to pay for those innovations and that content. There is, of course, a drive to lower the cost of the content. There's a big debate in the US about the price of textbooks and how expensive they are, and how often you have to buy them. Having 3 kids in college, I experienced this firsthand. But I think that depending on the nature of the content and depending on the nature of how you choose to distribute it, I think people will still be willing to pay for it. Okay, I have a second question. In Germany, we do experience difficulties in convincing the private sector that university IP doesn't come free of charge. From your experience, do you think this might be just a matter of time getting them used to this new era? I think we are talking about cultural change here, which might very well take some time. I agree with that comment and that assessment. There are industry sectors where university industry collaboration is pretty common, and companies are willing to pay for university IP. There are other sectors where, however, the collaboration is less common, and the approach of companies is that the intellectual property should be free. My discussion with companies who think that university intellectual property should be free is to let them know that the freest form of intellectual property are university publications, and which means that a university has to make that intellectual property available to everybody. It cannot just be free for the exclusive benefit of one company under a quote-unquote free license. And so there is a middle ground that I think needs to be achieved, and that really goes to the heart of the comments that I made with respect to de-risking or reducing the risk of a company acquiring the technology, both with respect to technology development costs and transaction costs. So, would you be willing to pay a lower royalty if you had exclusivity or exclusivity for a period? And this does take some time, and it is a cultural issue, but I think it's a cultural issue within particular industry sectors. And it also is a cultural issue with a bygone era, to put it in. It reflects an attitude which does not reflect the current situation. Could you circulate a few URLs of technology portals that you found good? I can look for some URLs that I can provide and can be circulated by Eva. I will certainly do that.
Yeah, if I may, Arundip, if I may, I would also like to invite once again all the attendees and all the companies, especially that the attendees are affiliated to or that they know, to take a look at the portal of the help desk itself, because we have combined between 25 and 30,000 technologies that are available. So I probably reckon that the process to get access to the technologies might not be that easy, probably because there are different layers in the results. And so that's why we will probably have a webinar just dedicated to that, to the way to make effective searches with the help desk. But I really urge you to take a look, because we have combined between the European Union and Japan around 30,000 technologies that are available for licensing. So please do take a look.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's excellent. Look, I think starting with that, and I think Eva's just put up the URL for that.
Eva.
And I will send some additional ones out. There are a few technology portals that do transactions of different kinds. Oregon Health and Science University Technology Portal, and I will send the URL out for that as well, is the only one that I think, I have not come across one at least, that allows monetary transactions to take place over the portal. Okay, what alternatives are there for universities that do not have technology transfer offices? There are actually many alternatives for universities without technology transfer offices. One is to partner with a university, a nearby university that does have a technology transfer office. When I was running technology transfer offices, we did for a period of time provide quote unquote consulting services through the office to a smaller institution that was very close by. Hiring firms or consultants to provide some of the services is a viable, very viable alternative. I know universities bring on board outside providers to help them with their efforts, even when they do have technology transfer offices, but it becomes even more important to access those resources if you don't have a technology transfer office. And actually just recently worked with a university to help them create a technology transfer office as well. So those are all viable alternatives. There are companies that provide all of the services that would be necessary. There are several in Europe and in the US, including mine, of course. But there are alternatives that are available. See, I see somebody else is typing, but there's no question that's come across. Here we go. Okay, major issue with those portals would be to identify those which are regularly used by industries only. This will enhance the chance of your technologies found by the right partners. You have suggestions on how to get notice about industry usage of such portals. I think that portals should not only be marketed towards the supply side, the universities, for looking at technologies, but they need to be actively marketed to industry as well. And I think if portals are provide more industry focus, so a particular sector, then I think it is more likely to be successful than a portal like the Autumn portal, which lists pretty much everything. The challenge with portals, of course, is, as Luca mentioned, that there could be many different layers, that once you do find a technology that is you want to license, then you still have to go through the university and do and follow their licensing process. So one of the things that a portal can do is to have whoever's listing technologies agree to, just one model agreement to use for transactions, which would reduce the transaction risk for the company. There's other things that you can certainly do, but I think from an industry perspective, when I think about a technology portal, it's a focus on, reducing the risk, making it easy to find, access, and obtain the technology. I hope that answered
Excellent.
the
If I
questions.
may jump in, Deep, thank you. Since this question is kind of somehow related also to the help desk portal, is I think it's kind of some sort of catch-22 in the sense that what we are trying to do, for example, with the help desk is not something new because as you could probably had the chance to hear from Adam Deep, there are experiences that date back to years ago, probably even tens of years ago. But the point is that it's kind of difficult to create something from scratch. But in this case, in the case of the help desk, we are kind of aggregating what is already existing. So it is a little bit more difficult for the technologies that are not, let's say, under the umbrella of the help desk, so that are not being posted with the uniform forms that we are using. But nevertheless, you have access to a wealth of knowledge that otherwise, if you want to have the access to, you should go to hundreds of different websites. So I really hope that in the next webinar that probably will be dedicated to this, uh, we will have the chance to show you how easy it could be to reach out to different universities and research centers under just one search from the same website. And then, of course, you have to follow different procedures because, as Arun Deep said, every region, every nation, as you know, better than me, any university might have different procedures, but still, at least you have the contact details and you can get in touch with the right person just from one website. So I really hope that we will have huge attendance for this future webinar because it's really important to show how it works.
Right, and look, I think you're absolutely right. And when I've looked at the technologies on your portal, you actually provide a lot more relevant information that I've seen that comes from other portals. Um, because when industry looks at the technology, they need to know not only what the technology is, but where it is in the development cycle. The willingness of the university to engage in more research and development and things like that, which which are critical for industry decision making.
Yeah, that's what we think. Let's see what the future holds.
Yeah,
Anyways, it seems that we are done with the questions. Arundip, I don't know how to thank you. Really, very, very helpful. It was really, really good to hear from your experience. And I think that everybody is hopefully happy about what they had the chance to hear. Here it's almost 1:30 a.m. in Tokyo, so ready to go to bed, but
yes.
very happy for the very fruitful day. So I would like to thank once again all the attendees, our guests, Aaron Deep and Eva, of course, from Brussels. Once again, thanks everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
It was a great um, to be able to do this.